Hey community foursome, what's up? This is your boy Sagarmalkar. Welcome to your channel once again and welcome to a brand new video. Today on the show I have Dr. Siddharth Warrier. Sid sir is a neurologist and today we talk with him about self-doubt and if self-doubt is good, if self-doubt is bad, how much self-doubt is good, the neuroscience behind self-doubt and all of that. Keep watching till the end. I'm sure you will gain some value out of it, right? So without wasting any time further, let's roll the intro and start with the video. Hi Siddharth sir, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you. And let me, just say why I have you on, and then maybe we can get into the topic of the day, so to say. I started watching you through Tanmay streams, and then I discovered your channel, and then checked out your whole depression wala playlist. And what it did for me is, neuroscience in itself and evolutionary psychology has been my escape, so to say, because understanding it made me understand how you are, and that gave me so much peace, that knowing, when you are depressed, knowing that, oh, this is the chemical that's going on and this is why you are feeling this, right? And therefore neuroscience has been my escape, so to say, in that sense. And therefore I wanted to get you on, because usually on our podcast when we have entrepreneurs, we keep talking about self-doubt and how people have self-doubt. And I thought, if we understand the neuroscience behind it, I'm sure someone, when thinking that, would just be like, "Arey, ye to do thing chemical hai, chill down. Let's, get back onto work." So yeah, that's why, I thought of having you, and thank you for being here.
Sure, pleasure.
Yeah. So, maybe we can just start with what self-doubt is and the basics of it. And I mean, that's it. And you can take on then.
So I don't want this to be a lecture. I mean, we will continue making this into a conversation,
Of course.
right? And the basic idea of self-doubt. So right at the onset, I wanted to say something about how all these terms, all these terminologies and definitions, they're all words that we use to try and understand a state of mind. But the thing with states of mind are that they are fluid. So each thing merges into one another, and we just use these different words to try to sort of bring boundaries into this continuous spectrum. But every word that we say is actually just another word in a spectrum, right? So when we say self-doubt,
Right.
it merges into lack of confidence and fear and anxiety and stress, and all these things all come in one spectrum. So
Right.
it's when we say that, okay, define self-doubt, there is nothing like that. There's no definition of self-doubt, right? So we are trying to sort of make sense of a state of mind that is very fluid from one form to another. So having said that,
Right.
the way I see it, the way I perceive self-doubt is when you have a sense of identity, you have a sense of
Hmm.
self, that this is who I am.
Hmm.
And that is not a constant state, that is not a static state. So your sense of self is continuously changing, evolving as you grow, as you learn, as experiences happen.
Hmm.
At There is also the things that you are doing. So there is action. So there is your sense of identity, and there are things that you are doing, and you can see the results of that.
Hmm.
At some point, there is a discordance between who you think you are as a person. Ki this is मैं ऐसा हूँ, and this is my level of expectation from myself, and the actions don't seem to reflect it. The results don't seem to reflect it.
Hmm.
So then you start to correct yourself. You try to correct yourself. And this is the normal process. This is how learning happens. So when you are riding a cycle the first time, you will try to ride a cycle, you will fall. Your body figures out, ki, acha, I should have maintained the balance 5% more to the right, 3% more to the left. That is how your brain calculates. And you learn.
Hmm.
The the concept of self-doubt happens when, in that process of learning,
Hmm.
fear creeps in. तो learning mixed with fear, उसमें self doubt आता है.
The fear of the result or the fear of what's the fear that we are referring to? The fear of the result, right?
So this is a like a much vaster answer than what the question might suggest, because
Right.
fear can be triggered by any number of things. So it depends on what you value. So if you are a result oriented person, then you are afraid of the result. If you are a public validation oriented person, then your fear will come from log kya kahenge. What I have done is failing, that is one thing, but more importantly, people will see me fail. Now that is the fear. So it all depends. It doesn't matter. To the brain, it doesn't matter what you are afraid of. The important thing is that you're afraid. And as soon as that fear comes in, that learning pathway there are hiccups. So then self-doubt comes in. Self-doubt basically means you doubt self. So when you doubt, that means you are putting a brake in that learning thing. You are continuously learning, उसमें एक break आ गया कि रुक. Are you sure? पिछले बार ऐसा हुआ था. Do you want to go through that again? Do you want to think about it again? That thing.
Right.
And it is also in a spectrum. Right? So then that is what I meant by how this is all in one spectrum. Yeah.
Right. So what that suggests mostly is that a lot of self-doubt is because of your circumstances at that point, right? When you are taking that action. Then how do you go on to then change? Maybe is it that you have to then change your circumstances, and how much of it is a voluntary process? Do you think you can then go on to reduce that, or is it that your brain is already observing your circumstances and then making up its own thing?
It's a continuous cycle. So you can't really separate one from the other, because it's like how in every, think of breathing. So you exhale and you inhale. That cycle has to continue. Correct? So it is like something has to go in and something has to come out. This is the case in everything. So similarly in learning, something has to go in, it has to get processed, and there has to be an output. And then depending on that output, you see the result of that output, and then you learn again. Right? So for example, Sagar, what do? You study filmmaking. Excellent. So the first time you shoot a scene, for example, and you have no idea of the effect of how light and shadows have an effect on a scene.
Right.
But then after you've made 3-4 short films or whatever, and then you go back to it, the first film you make, you'll realize that, oh, I should have placed an extra camera here, I should have arranged the lights this way, and you didn't know that at that time. Like, you learn it much better. And you learned because those circumstances happened. There was no way to avoid it. If not that mistake, you would have made some other mistake. So circumstances and emotions are like in a continuous cycle. So one will lead to another.
And then how do you, maybe before we go to how then one copes up with that, I'd like to ask, what's the neuroscience behind it? Like, when you are self-doubting, what's happening in your brain?
So think of it in two broad areas. Behind your forehead, there is a place called the frontal lobe. Right? That's the main one. That is the one that makes you human. Because that's the most recently evolved one. And in the frontal lobe, the aage wala part of the frontal lobe is called the prefrontal cortex. Correct. PFC.
Right.
And this PFC is the one that does all the thinking, the calculation, the logic, all of that.
Right.
So the part of your brain that tells you that you are a filmmaker, and at some point you want to become this kind of filmmaker, and the part of the brain that allows you to decide the sequence of filmmaking. So when you're shooting a film, pehle kya karna hai, baad mein kya karna hai, all of those decisions are taken in your prefrontal cortex. When you shoot a film and you analyze it, when a shoot isn't exactly as you wanted it, it is your prefrontal cortex that tells you that this isn't exactly as you wanted it. But when you feel sad about it, or when you feel happy that yes, the shoot went exactly as I wanted, that feeling is coming from a different place, which is a little more behind and inside, called as the limbic system.
Got it.
Right. So this is the loop. So your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system are continuously talking to each other. So your prefrontal cortex decides क्या करना है and result क्या है, and your limbic system decides what do I feel about it. So they are two separate things. Yeah.
So when because self-doubt occurs before the results are out, right? Before the shoot has gone well or not, right? So is it the limbic system telling your PFC that dude, make sure that it goes right, because otherwise I won't be happy? And is it a evolutionary thing where to do things right, you evolved in a certain way where and I from there comes the idea of that certain amount of self-doubt is necessary, right?
Yeah.
And is it like that? How is that like?
Correct. So you answered a lot of your own questions. So what is the difference between self-doubt, behaving sensibly, and acting recklessly?
I think the amount of self-doubt that's there.
Correct. Right. So think of it as you are turning a knob, like you're turning a volume key from low to high. Everything has a sweet spot. So if you turn self-doubt ekdam high, you won't be able to do anything. And then you reduce self-doubt thoda, and you reach a sweet spot where you are able to do things, but you are also thinking about the consequences. And then you turn it to zero, and then you don't care. You will do anything. You will drive rashly. You will make really rash investments in the stock market. You will make very poor decisions, because why do you care? You have no doubt. There is no need to overthink. So there is a sweet spot of self-doubt, just like there is a sweet spot in any state of mind. Yes, exactly. So it's very important to understand. So when we talk of self-doubt, we try to think of it in black and white. Self-doubt मतलब होना ही नहीं चाहिए. ऐसा नहीं है. You just modulate it a little.
So when we were planning for this session, I did an Insta story on to get an idea of how widespread the problem is.
Yeah.
And I did two stories. One was how many people of you have self-doubt, okay, which was simply answered in yes and no, which was around 80% of my audience had it. Okay. Wow. Then I had a meter kind of a thing where the first thing was कि मेरे को self-doubt नहीं है, ठीक है, to the effect of that. The middle one was कि before I start everything, I have doubt if I'll be able to do it or not. And the third was कि मेरे को इतना self-doubt है कि I can't even process it. The whole idea paralyzes me. Okay? And I was happy to see the most of them fall in the between part.
Yeah.
Right? That you should, calculate if you want to do that or not. Otherwise, you are just, as you said, reckless, right? But the last part of it, when it starts paralyzing you, right? How does one then deal with that?
So, like any other mental dealing, there is a limit beyond which it's a little difficult to do everything by yourself. So there is a limit beyond which, suppose your self-doubt is so much that you can't even think clearly, then you may need help, right? And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You need help just to get you to that point beyond which you can take care of yourself. If you are already at that point where you are able to think clearly and at least make decisions, thoda to, for yourself at least, then the next step is to understand why and where it came from. Because self-doubt never comes just aise. It is usually always a result of previous experiences. Something. So you may be doing that one thing for the first time, but maybe you've had some unfortunate experience doing something else, and you went through some unpleasant result which you want to avoid. Because basic funda of self doubt is that there is something you wish to avoid. So there's something that you are afraid of, and it really helps to know ye kya hai, kyun hai, and then you can deal with it. Because as soon as you define the problem, it becomes easier.
When you say that, it also answers one of the other questions that came in, which was like, why is it that we don't have self doubt when we are small? And why is it that when I have grown this much, I have started having self doubt? Because it is somewhere related to the things you did, right? And
Correct.
the result that came out. Then
Yes.
how I mean, see, if it's at the extreme ends, of course it's problematic on the both the ends, and then of course you need help. But which the most common point of self doubt is the middle one, right? Where you are thinking if you want to do that or not, and sometimes that might be right, but sometimes it might not be. Sometimes you have to make decisions and do some stuff. How does one go about that? How does one start analyzing what's is there something they can tell themselves? Is there some
Hmm.
kind of cognitive therapy that they can go through, habitual therapy that they can go through, that they can overcome that barrier?
Right. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, we are not going to talk about much today because I feel that that should be done under guidance.
Yeah, sure.
Huh. And and it has a whole other speciality that deals with it. What we can talk about is the sort of like the trying to understand the logic behind it. So when you have this problem, when you find yourself doubting a lot of things, the problem is that it translates into everything else. So it could be that your fear got triggered by one particular thing, and then that translates into other spheres of your life, or it may be very specific. So there may be people who are extremely confident when they're with their friends, but they are struck with self doubt in their career, or vice versa. There may be people who are very good public performers, public speakers, but when they have to deal with like a very emotional situation at home, suddenly they can't say anything. So everybody has a different comfort zone, and everybody has some things that they're uncomfortable with. So identifying your comfort zone and identifying your trigger is step one to figuring out why do you have this issue at all, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think, but how does one go about it, right? Do they sit and write that this is where it
Correct.
gets
Correct.
extreme for me?
Yeah.
Or is it
Yeah.
that they take calculated steps towards, maybe if swimming is something that paralyzes you, do you go into a small swimming pool and try? Is that the way to go to take small steps? Or is it that you first sit, analyze yourself, and like, how does one go about it?
So both of those things go hand in hand, according to me, because knowing it and doing something about it should go together. Because just knowing it will start the process, but there are still things that you need to do. The only difference is that when you do them, you will know why you are doing it, which is why I personally recommend that people understand what is happening in your brain. So even if you are going through anxiety or depression and you're undergoing therapy, it helps to know what is happening in your brain, so that while you're taking the medicines, while you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, having the sense of purpose, having an understanding of why, that changes it in some way, because it allows you to visualize your recovery. And for me, that makes a big difference. So to answer your question, it has to go hand in hand. uh, One of the ways in which you can analyze yourself is, like you said, writing it down, so that is journaling. And another way is to use people as sounding boards, so that is conversations. And a third way is to take professional help, so you undergo counseling. And these are people who are professionals in doing this exact thing, so letting you come to an understanding of your own state of mind. Not everybody would need it, but then some do, and those who do should definitely go for it.
Understand. I think with that being said, I think what I do, um, I think in self doubt, right? One of the major questions that was coming uh, in the DMs or in the sticker box was, is there an immediate solution to it? Do you think that's a case with any mental health, or specifically with self doubt? Do you think telling yourself something does help temporarily, or is that the
No.
right way to go?
So I'm not a fan of temporary solutions. I'm not a fan of just telling somebody, hey, be confident or get over it, because essentially that doesn't mean anything, is what I feel. That I think that it's far more important to come to an understanding of what is really going on and solve it from there. So for me, it is about learning. So, sort of coming to an understanding that nothing is permanent, nothing is absolute. If you say that मैं ऐसा ही हूँ, that doesn't mean that you don't change. You can't change, because your brain, your neural networks are this is an organ that is capable of change. And so that is step one, to know that everything can be changed if you train it. And second is, one of the most common reasons for doubt is uh, what will happen if this will go wrong? What will happen if I'm wrong? And the reason that you're so afraid of it is that somewhere our thinking of learning is faulty. So I think that learning to learn is a important concept that people should think about. And the more confident you are that you will learn to learn, jo bhi ho, whatever is the new situation, I will learn. If you have that confidence that I will be able to make mistakes, observe my mistakes, figure out where I went wrong, and make changes. If that confidence is there, then self doubt automatically goes down, because it doesn't matter, because mistakes now suddenly stop being personal. Mistakes just mean something to learn from. When you take mistakes personally, then the whole thing of fear and self doubt comes in.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, a good life lesson to be by. But
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
few other questions that were, one was that how much is the brain in control of this? How much can you do? And that's one question that has been uh, troubling me as well, and especially after watching and reading a lot of neurology and evolutionary psychology. It seems like you are not, I mean, it's there is only so much you can do, and there's so much that is happening and you just don't
Correct.
know about, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
I mean, I know it's not very. I mean, it is connected to self doubt, but I'd like to ask this: how much is the brain in control of you, and how much can you control it?
Right. So these are what you just said. Uh, it is a very philosophical, psychological, spiritual, religious question, because the minute you say how much does the brain control you, you are asking what do you mean by you, correct? And the answer to that is that you are whoever you are conscious of being. So a baby who is born is conscious of itself at some point. Animals are also conscious of themselves at some point. And the more you grow, the more conscious you are about yourself. So someday we'll talk about child psychology and how self-consciousness evolves in a child. But uh, the idea of how I have a mind, this is not something that children are born with. It is something that comes after a few years. Yeah, correct. And the next step is that my mind is separate from your mind, which is the next step. So when a child at 3 years of age will think, I have a chocolate, he might think that, okay, so everybody thinks that I have a chocolate. But then gradually you realize that, okay, me having a chocolate doesn't mean that everybody has a chocolate, because everybody has a mind of their own. And that is what develops into empathy and feeling about other people and all that. So consciousness is a spectrum. So when you say you, that you is very variable. So look at it this way: you are a part of your brain, and the more self-aware you are, the more you grow in your brain. And the less self-aware you are, the part of you in your brain is very small. So ideally, mindfulness, as you go on becoming more and more mindful, you are actually becoming aware of more parts of your brain. That is what it means.
To maybe try and summarize it or simplify what you just said is the idea of you, who you are, is created by your brain, is therefore just a fragment of imagination of your brain, right? I think we also touched upon it in our other podcast where we were talking about who you are, right? We were repeatedly quoting who you are, and the conclusion that we draw was that there is no who you are just contradictions, right? And the idea of you is therefore a fragment of your brain, and therefore to understand who you are, who Sagar is, you have to understand your brain better, because the idea comes from there.
Right. So when we started this conversation, I told you about PFC and limbic system. So when you say who you are right now, when I tell you, okay, tell me about yourself, you will tell me certain things. You will tell me that your name is so and so. You'll tell me that you are a filmmaker and this is what you want to do. And you'll tell me if you're happy or sad. Now, all of these things come from different parts of your brain. But there is a separate part of your brain that puts it all together and gives you a final package. Ki chalo, if somebody asks you, ye sab kuch saath mein dal ke bol de. So that is your sense of identity. But they are not coming from one part, they're coming from all parts. Right? And when somebody hits your arm, you will say, somebody hit me. Because so your arm is also part of you. So it all depends on till where you are identifying with.
Right.
Right? So that is, yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about was that, or summarize on, was that we talked about the degrees of mental health, right? The degrees of self-doubt, right? I want to know, how does one decide which degree they are on? Because I think this is one of the main reasons that people offer help related to mental health late, right? And they would ask for help late because they are not able to decide which degree they are on, and if they have stepped over that line.
It's a good question.
Yeah. So how does one identify that line?
So obviously it's an arbitrary line, because you can't say that, okay, if you spend 10 minutes of your day in self-doubt, then it's okay, but 15 minutes is a problem. It's not like that. One of the best ways to do it is to check your own functionality. By which I mean, are you able to function like you want to? So is your self-doubt coming in your way, or is it helping you? Or is it both? It could be both also. And if it is coming in your way more than it is helping you, then it's a problem. So the way I do it is, I have self-doubt, and it is a part of the variables. So there are lots of things. So there are a lot of variables involved. There are things I want to do. There is time, there is money, there is resources, there is what will my friends and family want from me. And another variable is self-doubt. So you don't let that self-doubt consume you. You just let that self-doubt be another variable. That, okay, I want this, I am doubting this. Fair enough. And then you take that into your equation. You take that self-doubt into your equation. You don't ignore it, but you don't give it more importance than it deserves.
To maybe add on to it or expand on the ideas that you laid,
Sure.
I have myself dealt with some amount of self-doubt, and I still do, right? And
Sure.
correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm no expert on this. Right. Right.
There's no
Sure.
such thing.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
be wrong.
So yeah, what
Yeah.
worked for me was that, see, self-doubt comes from a very good place of evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, where you should be scared of stepping into new territories, new things, right? Because calculated risk is a good thing, right? But when you're
Correct.
going into new thing, and the thought process is like you might fail, and therefore let's prepare more and let's go prepared into this. Then it's amazing thing. It's a fabulous thing, right? But if that thought process is crippling you to not even step into it, not to even experiment with these things, that is when it becomes problem. And also not once, right? Once off, you might think this is not for me, let's not do this. Skydiving, this is not for me. But if it happens again
Yeah,
and again, over and over again, and you can't experiment anything new, then it might be dangerous, and you want to take
maybe.
professional help,
Correct.
right?
So, what you just said, it's very relative because everybody, anybody, like even somebody who says, I have zero self doubt,
I didn't know
they,
people like that existed until I
they,
did that story.
right. So, anybody who says that just means that it just means they are very careful to not do things that are outside their comfort zone because everybody has some level, something that is so outside their comfort zone that they will hesitate. They will think, oh wait, right? Now, as a random example, you take somebody who has zero self-doubt, you put them on a spaceship and you give them a spacesuit and say, okay, go for a walk outside the spacecraft. And suppose they've had no training, right? They will feel some self-doubt because they are so outside their comfort zone. They have never trained for this. They will feel fear. What if something happens? And that fear is relative, which is what I'm trying to say. Some people will have to go to that extreme. Some people will feel that just in calling up their boss. Like it is relative where you feel that fear, but fear is fear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you so much for doing this, man. And I hope it helped someone, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it did. And yeah, thank you for doing this. Yeah. That was it for the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure you learned a lot about neuroscience, about self doubt, and about other things as well. If you like the video, you know the drill. Like, share, subscribe. Put on the bell icon so the next time we come up with something so interesting, you are the first one to know about it, right? Also, tag Sid Sir on your Insta stories and tell him how much you like this video, right? And yes, with that being said, till the next time we bring you such amazing content, stay healthy, stay awesome, do some awesome stuff. Remember that you're one of your kind, live a kick-ass life, be kind to one another, and on that note, farewell mates.